Thanks so much. I just wanted to pick on two questions that we did sort of discuss, which aren't, which I find are very connected to what is currently going on, certain debates within our context here in India, and the ways that people such as Kavita have responded on various forums. And so I'd just like to sort of address those and request her to speak about that to us, and then actually open it up, because we have a whole lot of things to discuss just based on the presentation. So one is that there are monuments in India, such as the 17th century Red Fort, which is going to be entrusted in care of a cement company, the Dalmia Bharat Group. I mean, that is the status, against which there was a statement written by various members, including historians and cultural practitioners, activists, theatre makers, etc. A statement released by Sehmat. I'm sure there have been others outside that circle as well. So how does your work link with the continuing questions of like this sort of architectural preservation and heritage management, as it's called? I mean, how do we create a kind of some sort of lasting resistance to such a move, such a kind of drastic move for a monument that is basically in the capital? So if it's so visible, and if this could potentially be proposed, then yeah, just if you could share.
So I actually am a little bit on the side of the arguments that have been in the center of these debates, because I don't per se think that money in itself is a bad thing. No? Money is a force, and you have to channelize that force in particular ways. I think the government doesn't lack money, that it could easily have made the allocations that it claims these corporations are going to make, but it chooses not to. The fact that they launched this scheme meant that there was some kind of attention being paid to the area for whatever reason, and in whatever flawed way. Almost all of the initiatives taken by this government in the field of education and culture have been deeply flawed. But in whatever flawed way, there was a moment of some discussion and some energy around it. And I wish that the discussion had gone into a more productive direction, in which we didn't talk so much about who is doing, so who is this businessman to go into the Red Fort, but to talk about what is being done. And if we could have focused on the what is being done, so that we have some respect and value for standards of work, we would have the outcome we want, whether by the government or whether by a corporation or whether by a public-private partnership. But it's kind of like, look at what the National Museum did to Naman's exhibition, right? They wrote the expert out of the picture. And similarly, in this, you have the government handing over control to a corporation, which is going to do whatever it does in exchange for the permission to add their branding to the site. And the entire transaction was just about that. You give us money, we give you ad space. There was nothing in the discussion, in the guidelines, about what are norms, what kind of expertise do you have to have on board, what can you touch and what can you not touch. There was no professional thinking guiding the initiative, either on the government side or on the private party side. And there is this terrible weakening we have all around, of professional standards and the expectation of expertise. We've lost it. And we only debate this thing of, is this capitalist, is this socialist or not? I think we are damaging ourselves by shifting the focus just to those terms.
And another aspect that has become key to sort of add to this question of scholarship and the circulation of scholarship beyond the academy, but also beyond certain kinds of discursive gatherings, is something such as the sort of example, if you want to go through that one or another, of this image of Krishna looking into the sky, sort of read as Krishna looking at the moon, and it sort of becomes used as a way to talk about a certain kind of a picture of sort of harmony and unity during Eid, versus Krishna looking at solar eclipse, which is another reading. And when there is this kind of this social sort of webbing of expertise versus popular logic versus a certain kind of celebrity culture also for certain kinds of authors and certain authorial voices. How do you fit into that, and how do you still sort of make yourself heard?
Yeah, so this is actually kind of interesting. For those of you who don't know, there was an 18th century painting which showed the Hindu god Krishna pointing at the sky. And some people on the left were circulating that. Do you have a picture of that?
We have to go online, onto scroll.
And so a bunch of
Kavita.
people started circulating that on Facebook and on Twitter as a sign of the harmony that existed at earlier times, where the Hindu god Krishna is showing his Muslim friends. Yeah, but if he finds it on the yeah, this one. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. So this was circulating, just before Eid, this was circulating as a message of communal harmony. Whoever circulated this was naive, because, I mean, it would be ahistorical. We can get into a longer discussion about repeated uses in history of the idea of Krishna returning and interacting with historic figures. But somebody said, okay, this is Krishna, and this is a Muslim friend of his, and he's being beneficent and helping him see the Eid moon so that he can break his Ramzan fast. And a whole bunch of people on the other side absolutely howled against it and said that this is inauthentic, it's incorrect, there's absolutely no reason to say this. They were right. It was a misidentification of a scene from the Bhagavad Puran where they're looking for other omens in the sky. But what startled me is the ferocity with which they were denying the idea that there ever has been any kind of friendly, harmonious, civil interchange between a Hindu and a Muslim in history. It's like the entire civilizational history consists of Hindus being killed by Muslims till now, when they're able to do the reverse, right? So that's what the Twitterverse is saying. And I did try to intervene by writing about it from what I know of this series of paintings and to try and clear some misapprehensions, because people were saying it might be fake, and I was trying to explain why paintings that we don't even know quite where they are right now need not be fake because of contingencies of how paintings are collected and how they circulate and how they hide in collections. And shortly after we got to know where the painting is, the collection became public, so that's all right. But what was very humbling for me is that for the last, 15 years, more than 15 years, I've been studying museums, as this exemplary cultural form, as this authoritative institution, the institution from which a claim is made that truth flows from me, that they produce knowledge. And I've been interested also in seeing how different kinds of groups then want to make museums, because the museum becomes that very authoritative source for information. So let's say I've worked on how marginal groups within India have tried to harness even the Holocaust Museum form to talk about the traumas of their communities, where it seems that the museum is a very valuable object to possess, right? But when I entered the Twitterverse, I said, man, I'm obsolete, All my work should just be like thrown in the dustbin. It has absolutely no meaning anymore. Because of the dispersal of the means of communication now, there is no authoritative source. And what you have instead are very, very combative voices which corner the debate in different places. So I've been following a handle called True Indology on Twitter. No, it is just so depressing because he mobilizes the tools of professional history by asking everybody, what is the source? Is this an authentic source? You don't have a historically verifiable source for the claim that you are making. But he's doing that to demolish a lot of the truisms that we have lived by. And I think the academy is powerless in front of that, because it's circulating in its own circle, where it's speaking to this ever expanding group of people who want to hear the doubts that he's raising. What can we do? You know, I published something in Artibus Azier. Who's going to read that, Natasha? Not the people who are following true Indology. What is the point? I don't know. What is the point of the academy today?
Okay, it's on now. So firstly, it's been a complete pleasure listening to you addressing real practical issues that you face all around in terms of putting up a fight with museums. And from what I understand, one of the things that you said in the first, when you started off, was that there was pressure put on these museums to do something, to put up a show. And perhaps, or let me go with this another way, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but you know, one of the really interesting things you said was that you brought the keepers on board as stakeholders. You made them feel that they were stakeholders, part of this museum, important factors, right? And so I think that's pretty important. So what I want to ask you is that what we as the Indian public, we are stakeholders too of the National Museum, of these public museums. We are the public. And it sounds to me that like a fight needs to be put up, a concerted countering of moribund museums, right? What do you suggest that the public could do?
Well, you know, the pressure that enabled the museum to put up the exhibition at all was a pressure that came from the museum's director, who happened to be Venu, right? So there's this fantastic director from Manyo who energizes the place. He gets the keepers to feel that they have to cooperate, otherwise they are in trouble with him. So that was one internal pressure that worked. And so that was the stick, let's say. And then Preeti and I tried to hold out the carrot by making them, as you say, stakeholders. And I hope that that was partially the reason why we got such gorgeous objects out of them. There are other wonderful objects we didn't get, which we were told about later. But, you know, at least we got some nice things for the show. Now, when Venu lost the job, when the Prime Minister sent him packing from the museum, his parting words to all of us who were the well-wishers, who were really heartbroken that he was going, was, "It's your museum. Don't give up your claim on it. I may not be there, but don't give up your claim." But actually, that is a utopian statement to make. And those of us who are on the outside, how much can we actually effect? No, we cannot effect very much. So there can be, you know, something which is brought to bear through, I think, in the current situation, more through friendships, you know, friendly overtures rather than criticisms. That might be a better way to go right now. But who wants your friendship also remains to be seen. You can try and see what it gets you. Like you can pitch your perfume idea to the painting curator and see, it might get you something. Yeah.
Yeah, but I have an impression that the kind of demise of museum and the moment when the Prime Minister sends away a competent museum director, apparently for political reasons or for whichever reasons there are, you know, this is part of larger picture of the demise of democratic institutions worldwide, you know, and this is not limited to India, Poland, or any other country, but basically this sort of competence and passion is being replaced with kind of passionless and incompetent the decisions that are purely of political nature have nothing to do with the values that you were speaking about. And what is even more worrying is that the public voice, so something that you were asking for, like what can we do? Because maybe the answer to the question why we can't is yes, we can, although it might sound, ridiculous. But the fact that is that the access is barred, so we can have discussions, but we have no direct leverage in terms of, the decisions that are taken on appointments, on how such institutions should be structured, how the work should be organized, how internal communication should be going, and so forth. Although we know very well how it could be, this is not a utopia. This is basically within the reach, but it's never reachable in the end. So it's a kind of, I think, rather disheartening moment, which is experienced in many other institutions of society, of which museum is one. If you follow the kind of Foucaultian, analysis of various institutions of the kind of post-enlightenment development, institutional development of societies, and I'm really shocked to hear, such a detailed description or analysis of, the case studies that demonstrate what is actually happening within the space of the museum, with an example being the museum in Delhi.
But I heard about Piotr Piotrowski in Warsaw as well, right? I mean, so you're right when you say that these kinds of pressures are brought to bear in many locations on many prestigious institutions.
Yes, I mean, Piotr Piotrowski proposed a very radical reform, both in terms of program and the kind of administrative structure of the National Museum of Art in Warsaw, which was built in early 1930s, and he had to leave the museum because of his too radical concept of what he called a critical museum, applied to the very holy National Museum of Warsaw. But now again the situation is different. So after several turns of history, there's again a new director coming who might be not that radical, but he's at least a good manager and very, competent person in the matters of art history. So, it might...
I think what's happening in India is there's a kind of an exhaustion with the idea of these holy cows of our big national institutions. And more you have private foundations now moving into making their own museums. A collector today in their right mind would not think of donating their collection to a major statal institution. And so they are making a series of modest-sized institutions of their own. And perhaps the hope is that in 20 years or 30 years, when these have energized the situation much more than any public institution, the public institutions might be forced to reform themselves. There was some question.
Sorry, there are actually a lot of questions in the room, and everybody's it's a serious classroom situation with like a lot of hands raised like me. So we're going to take a few questions all together. Yeah. Matushi, Mario, do you have a question? Okay, I'm going to take people who haven't been speaking much through the days, and so Matushi, Mario, Janvi, and then we move on to this side, and let's see how much time we have.
Hi, it's a very interesting presentation. Hi, can I be heard? Yeah, it's a very interesting presentation and really, really glad to hear you. I have two simple questions. One is, if the show was in Delhi, why was the original piece not shown of the dancing girl? Second question is, if that book had to be removed because of its precarious position of flattening out, then couldn't a digital version be shown where the pages could be just shifted? It was shown. And why wasn't the dancing girl the original shown? Because
shall I answer?
I'm just going to comment about just 2 minutes. I think something very important needs to be told. I think Kavita knows it. BR money
Yes,
I think I need to.
Okay,
I mean, I have spent about.
Go ahead and say it.
Yeah, I've spent 20 years working on the Archaeological Survey of India. BR Money who's the director of National Museum, who Meera had interviewed, is the archaeologist who excavated Ayodhya. So something you need to know.
And found the Ram Mandir.
And he found the Ram Mandir. BR Money was very close to S.P. Gupta. S.P. Gupta and B.B. Lal are the father of Hindutva archaeology in India. So this is something you need to know. There are 4 figures that is important to be told. B.B. Lal, who excavated the early Ayodhya in 1977, was a very close, he was part of the RSS. He's a Sanghi archaeologist who's still alive. S.P. Gupta, who was earlier, I think this needs to be spoken about. S.P. Gupta, who was earlier the chief curator of the Allahabad Museum, was unambiguously a Sanghi archaeologist. They both spent a lot of time working on the archaeology, or let's say false archaeology of Ayodhya in 1977. And B.R. Mani, R.S. Bisht, who excavated Dholavira, they were all in the direct lineage of what we call Bhagwa archaeologist. And that's the term that we use. And Dr. Mani in the ASI had become a director, and he was picked up when he was removed with an express purpose of Dr. Mani coming in. And Dr. Mani is trained as a Harappan archaeologist. He's trained as a medieval archaeologist. And this whole act, so this is not an accident that Harappan dancing girl doesn't emerge, or when she emerges in a bikini. It's not an accident. It is a calculated practice of destroying museums and institutions in India. And this is not with National Museum. The godfather of National Museum is the Archaeological Survey of India. They have totally taken it up. And this is something that needs to be told and spoken about.
Absolutely.
And so what is happening, and the removal of experts, is that, why somebody like a Twitter handle like the real Indology is coming, is that there's something very interesting happening with the appropriation of past in India, which has been happening for the last 30 years, but now it has become virulent, which emerges from what happened on 6th of December, 1992. That needs to be underscored. That moment is already having a repercussion, and it is going to have a repercussion. Museums like National Museum will be appropriated and might even be destroyed. If you get a chance, online, there is a CAG report, CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General of India, 2013. It's a 300-page report which has a damning analysis of Archaeological Survey of India, National Museum. We have close to 100,000 antiquities. They don't have a clue where they are. Yes. Go online, CAG report 2013. This is the government of India telling government of India, you are not doing a good job. 2013. Exactly.
So there's a longer history.
This is a long history.
Should I take these
Sorry
two?
for taking up.
Okay, let's take all of them.
We have questions at the back.
There's just one thing
Sorry.
There's just one thing I wanted to mention. There is something basically elitist about museums, And unless we can bring the museums outside to, let's say, the schools and, all to the people as such, not confined to the middle classes. I think that is where, otherwise, you see, unless common people, slum children, school, if they think, no, this is something like they are interested in cricket, for example. I don't know if that can be done to bring the museum outside.
We'll talk about this.
When we take questions at the back, thank you so much.
Another question on that side, let's take that. Piche. I don't know how we are for time. We're not good, no?
Could you start your question, Mario?
Hi.
Yeah.
Hello, Kavita. How are you? Okay, so my question basically stems from something that you've been thinking about like cultural amnesia and the historical erasure. And museums perhaps as a peculiar space, a peculiar site for historical narratives written by majoritarian governments. When they are in power, they write a certain narrative. The National Museum becomes even more peculiar case because it's right after independence. It's when the country is kind of like claiming its heritage, writing its narrative, and everything that is speculative kind of becomes fact.
Yeah.
When an exhibition like India and the World which is also largely speculative and talks about histories rubbing off on histories and thereby like a collective growth written around the world in 9 stories. I want you to kind of respond to the idea of vandalism on 2 counts.
Oh my God.
One is vandalism of the exhibition. At the same time, for this vandalism to be performed on a site like the museum, which is also a site of vandalism and displacement and appropriation and borrowed, speculated.
Have you ever asked a small and simple question in your life? Mario, every question you ask requires a library. They're all so deep.
Sorry, I'm done.
Janvi, in the front. Yes, and then. Okay, Adip, start.
Okay, I really will be brief. Oh, he was saying something.
It's okay, the mic is there. Please. Oh, okay.
Working? No. Yes. Thank you for your presentation. I don't know, I may take the devil's side in asking. You've reflected on, say, the reconciliation between cultures, and it's been very actively exhibited. My question is regarding the last part of your presentation. Why this censorship on your part? Because just as you so responsibly shown the reconciliation part, why did you, not on purpose, but you could have also very responsibly, because that is also sort of, percolation of knowledge. And that also would do service to democracy as an idea. So just as simple as that.
I will try to be brief. I don't want to be reprimanded. It reminded me of the classroom.
Appreciation of Mario. You have to. I hope you got that. Mario.
I did. I absolutely did. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So quickly, I think we've got enough comments by now to understand that this is about a claim to past, right? And it's about rewriting the past. And conservation of objects and museums plays a certain kind of question problem to this situation. Museums are highly contested sites. They've always been contested sites. One other way to think about doing this, because this is not simply about understanding what's not happening here, but what do we do elsewhere? And so to think about doing history in other ways, right? So where you engage with the contemporary and do history, where you're not then saying, okay, I'm conserving the past, I'm laying a claim to the past, but in fact you bring history to bear upon doing other things in other forms, right? So you don't have exhibitions in a museum, but you start sort of reusing gallery spaces. And this is something that I'm trying to do now, like yours exactly, and that's exactly what you're doing with this hub. So I think looking at other opportunities of public spaces which can be revitalized to create the debate which then can hopefully, as you say, and I completely am in agreement with your timeline, which is 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. We've lost so much ground in the last 20 years. It's going to be another 40 years before we can reclaim the ground to say, okay, now back to the museum again, right? And this is, so one sentence thing, revitalizing other public spaces to bring history back in, because it is about history. It really is about history and how we reclaim our past in order to explain why what's happening now is consequential, right? And how it kind of, not teleologically, but in terms of, how the past in a sense bears out in our current lives. Was that brief?
No, it was not brief. But I will not reprimand. Okay, so let me start with the first question first. Regarding the display of the manuscript in our exhibition, when the manuscript was taken off display, we replaced it in the vitrine with a dummy manuscript. We just had 2 pages printed in color. But there was an iPad nearby that you could scroll through the whole book through, which was quite exciting, I thought. Why is the dancing girl not on show in the National Museum? You know, the dancing girl is not even on show in the permanent gallery of the National Museum, where you have the Harappan gallery, where you have a case for the dancing girl. There is a replica there as well. As far as I know, the dancing girl has not been on display, and for all we know, the dancing girl no longer exists. You know, it could be. I mean, what is the reason? Okay, Avinash seems to know something. No. I mean, it's a possibility. Why do they not show her in their own premises? Which, you know, brings us to the CAG report that you were mentioning, which paints such a damning picture of the way our institutions have been run. Now, this issue of Bhagwa archaeology, there are two things that are going side by side, which I think are very interesting. So I have a school-going son, and he's studying in a CBSE school, so he gets what, you know, the central government produced textbooks to study. And when I have to try and teach him history, I tear my hair out, because the books are bad, of course, but they are so left that to me, I think of myself as a liberal, to me the books are annoying, because it's only about the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, and I'm like, that is not the whole of the 19th century, you know. I find it a problem how colored the books are in one color, but parallel to that is the very important move that has been going on over the last 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years that Avinash was pointing to, which is the saffronization of those institutions which are actually keeping and producing the sources from which history is written. Now, one of the reasons why we have such poor human resource in our museums and in our archaeological surveys is that it has not been a prestigious profession. It has not been well paid. There is very little autonomy for the people who work on it. It has not been glamorous. And as a result of which, it has not been something that attracts very bright people. And I feel that for very many decades, those who have gone into these institutions have gone because they're ideologically motivated to do so. And in fact, Hilal Ahmed has gone further, and he has said that it was a conscious process of the RSS to make sure that their people were in these institutions, so that in times to come they would have command of them. And I think they successfully did that in the ASI, and they have successfully done that in most of our museums in North India. So we know that. So there's this very peculiar thing that there are some elite professors from Jadavpur and GNU who are writing the textbooks that our children are reading. And there are the very strongly right-wing people who are actually the custodians of these institutions that you speak of as public institutions, right? And I think somewhere both these have sort of failed us in some way to produce a broader, more reasoned, and less, you know, you use the word virulent, so a less virulently ideological interest in history. So those who are interested in history and in the public performance around history are very strongly from the left or very strongly from the right. And there isn't a space in the middle, I think, in public spaces. I have another theory about museums and middle classes, which we can't go into here. But I think historically, public museums in India have actually been spaces for the subaltern classes to visit rather than the middle class. We don't have the French situation over here of embourgeoisment through museum visitorship at all. And that is also one of the things that shapes the museum culture that we have today. Mario, you asked a very large question about vandalism, and it's a question which is actually, it's so large because it's going deep into the epistemological foundations of museum making, you know, where, of course, what we call an institution of preservation is an institution that is feeding off the destruction of monuments so that we can pick up the fragments and bring them into our museums. And therefore, what the museum claims that it does is actually premised on a certain kind of obfuscation and a lie, right? And we do not talk about that lie because it is part of our habitus. It forms us. It's the story we tell ourselves about what we do is contradicted if we accept the reality that you're bringing in. But at the same time, I wouldn't collapse all the levels of vandalism into each other, So the vandalism that is perpetrated by the archaeologist who picks up a piece from the field and instead of trying to stick it back on the temple, brings it into the museum, is a little different from the vandalism that B.R. Money performs on Naman's exhibition, is a little different from the vandalism that the Islamic State performs in the Mosul Museum. So we will not collapse them. It won't help us if we collapse them, but we need to think about all of these acts also as acts that produce meaning even as they destroy objects, but each act is producing a different kind of meaning and a different set of signifiers, right, which we must not congeal.
The idea is more about the museum, the site for all these different kinds of vandalism.
Yeah.
And thereby,
Yeah.
something that we don't consciously or something that we don't speak about, don't bring into account is that the museum is, the idea of the museum is very much based on the foundation of vandalism. So what does it mean for vandalism to be performed in so many different
Yes.
not collapse them into each other at all, absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's not it.
Yeah, no. So just to appreciate the alertness of your question and to say that indeed all these levels of vandalism are premising the museum, are active in the museum, and we must remain alert to them and acknowledge them in different ways, right? Adip, what you asked, it's my self-criticism also. Like I've made fun of something which I myself performed when I was given the opportunity to mount something in the National Museum. And the thing that I made fun of is the fact that every time we deal with heritage, we only celebrate. It's our default mode. So if I'm looking at Mughal paintings, I'm saying Mughal paintings are great. It doesn't become my place to talk about the economic policies which have been bad of the Mughal state or the agrarian policies that may have been bad. If I'm looking at textiles produced in Bengal and I'm putting them in a show, I'm saying they are great. Long histories of labor, exploitation that might lie behind them. I don't put that in my show. If I'm looking at some dhokra work which is done in Madhya Pradesh or in Bastar, right, I'm celebrating it and the ingenuity of the artisan. Heritage, all our heritage discourses tend to be celebratory. Now, I also got into that mode. We did have the possibility of bringing in some broken sculptures from Warangal, which is one of the Kakatiya kingdoms, which was destroyed by a Sultanate incursion. Those objects are there in the corridors of the National Museum. We could have brought it in. We did not think that we could narrativize it well enough in a public forum for it to, for the complexity to come across. So we let it be. It was a kind of dereliction, perhaps you can rightly say, of academic duty on our part. But we stayed with the celebratory mode, And I think there, perhaps, the professional heritage lovers have something to learn from actually the space of contemporary art, where contemporary art fearlessly brings criticism, brings even self-hatred into its expositions. But in the historical field, we don't do that. We only choose to show something if we can say something celebratory about it. But then we also have to remember that the audience for contemporary art is already an audience of a narrower spread. It's an upper middle class, well-heeled, well-educated audience, which is already converted and understands the complexities of the narrative. In a public museum like the National Museum, we are addressing a very broad range of people. We have to think about how can we put these stories forward, through what means, perhaps through some kinds of indirection as well, in order to be able to do them in a way that is wise. Yeah?
Would you like to respond to Janvi?
If there's, Janvi.
When you finish everything, I have a question.
Yeah, Janvi, public space, reclaiming public space. So somewhere I think I was also addressing her when I was talking about the failure of our textbooks and the failure of the, our failure to be alert to what is happening to the ASI and the museums. But more and more I feel, and I'm not the right person to feel it with my creaking knees and my slow typing, but more and more I feel the space to occupy is the social media space. Yeah, we can give up on the museums for the next 10, 20 years, and it actually won't even hurt that much. But let us occupy social media.
So many alternate Actually, Mike, I have a short question linked to what you're just saying, which is, say, the textbooks, the way it's shifting the population is taking 3, 4, 5, 6 years for those kids to grow up and become the way they want designed to be. But for me, the bigger fear is like the serials that are coming out every evening about Rana Pratap and Akbar and this one and that one. So what I want to ask you is, say the liberal historians, the educated, creative people, you know, you're constantly transgressing boundaries of contemporary and whatever the old style of representation and so on and so forth. Why are you not able to devise something to counter on television, on these kind of media, the way you're saying Twitter, which, you know, is a much more quick delivery, kind of, okay, superficial, but I think a new language of speaking, there's no point in hammering on the National Museum and Modi. I think it's the game of numbers with population at the moment. So we have to approach it in a very different manner. I mean, that was what I thought.
Yeah. No, it's sometimes so difficult because you also feel that people are only willing to hear what they already want to hear. You know, it puzzles me. I read the textbooks that my son is being educated with, and I think that those people who are out there with their sticks and their swords on the street are the people who read these books. So did education do anything to shape minds? Or does it do nothing? Where are people being cultured? What is the formation coming from? So even when we breastbeat about the textbooks being changed and the National Museum exhibitions being bowdlerized, maybe they don't count. Maybe what counts is somewhere else.
Is there any intellectual autonomy?
Sorry, you'd have to wait for the mic, please, so that everybody can... I am asking you to please wait for the mic so that everybody can hear you. We're recording.
I just wanted to...
They're recording everything. So
Thank you.
Well
Thank you so much for waiting.
I just wanted to ask you, is there any intellectual autonomy about the university which exists within the National Museum?
Oh. I've remained actually autonomous of it, and that's as close. Yeah, no. Actually, I don't quite know. Yes, yes. I'm afraid I know very little about that institution, even though it's the other art history institution in my own city, but I've had practically no interaction with it. So I can't tell you what they teach and what kind of research they encourage. I really am ignorant. Let my ignorance speak. Yeah.
We actually have a lot of time for questions in the evening, and it's in fact going to be an animated discussion if you all return to some of the participants, because we have a wonderful second presentation before lunch, which I would be very happy to start with. Thank you, Kavita.